Samantha Ellis wasn't flying for politics that morning. She was flying for family. Her cousin Troy had passed unexpectedly at 41. Liver failure. She grew up with him like a brother. The funeral in New Orleans wasn't optional. It was a promise. Wearing a black blouse beneath a navy blazer, Samantha moved through the terminal with quiet purpose. Her flight boarded in 40 minutes. She handed her ID to the gate agent, a young man with a name tag that barely hung straight. He looked at her. Not long, just that kind of look, the dismissive one. "Ma'am, you're not in the system." "I checked in hours ago," she replied calmly, showing her phone. The boarding pass glowed brightly. The smirk came next. Then the second agent. "She's flagged. Random review," the woman said flatly, not even making eye contact. "Again?" Samantha said softly. "I fly this route monthly. If you don't comply, we'll call security." The words hit like cold steel. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't resisted. Still, they treated her like a threat. As passengers watched, phones lifted silently. Samantha stood tall, jaw tight, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she refused to be made small. The metal chair was colder than it looked. Samantha sat in silence, arms folded, watching her bag being pawed through like contraband. Her toiletries were laid out across a scratch table. A tube of toothpaste, a travel-sized lotion, a folder labeled House Resolution 340. None of it dangerous. All of it treated like evidence. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't yelling. That's what they wanted, a reason. But she wouldn't give it. They hadn't found anything, of course. There was nothing to find. But they still hadn't let her go. The flight to New Orleans had taken off 20 minutes ago. She saw it through the window, tail lights shrinking into the sky. That was the sound of a door closing, a promise broken. She'd told Troy's daughter she'd be there, told her she'd speak. Now, nothing, and they still hadn't told her why. "Ma'am," one of the TSA officers said, his voice neutral like he'd practiced it, "we appreciate your patience. Someone will be with you shortly." Samantha didn't answer. She just nodded. The kind of nod that wasn't agreement, just acknowledgement. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She reached for it, hands trembling slightly. One text. "I'm here." That was all it said. No name, no punctuation. Just 3 words from the one man who never needed to raise his voice to shift an entire room. Justice Marcus Ellis, retired appellate judge, U.S. Fifth Circuit. He had served 32 years on the bench, spent his entire life mastering the art of restraint, learning how power wasn't always in shouting. Sometimes it was in silence. Sometimes it was in showing up. Today he had shown up. Outside the terminal doors, his car rolled to a slow stop. The driver, a friend from the neighborhood, didn't speak. Marcus stepped out, wearing a charcoal gray coat, black leather gloves, and a scarf Samantha had knitted him 2 winters ago. He adjusted it absent-mindedly as he scanned the crowd. No chaos, no raised voices, just injustice hiding in plain view. Inside, Samantha felt something shift. She couldn't hear his footsteps, but she could feel them. The way you feel a thunderstorm coming in the bones. One of the TSA officers stood up straighter. The younger one shifted from foot to foot, suddenly remembering his radio wasn't clipped in properly. Then the doors opened, and Marcus Ellis walked in. He didn't ask for anyone. He didn't wave a badge. He walked straight to his wife and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded once. He turned to the nearest officer. "Who's in charge?" The officer stiffened. "Sir, may I ask who?" "I'm Marcus Ellis, retired federal judge. Who is in charge?" The authority in his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was final. The kind of tone that made seasoned attorneys drop their arguments and reconsider everything. A supervisor was summoned, fast. His tie was crooked. His face already carried the sheen of apology, but it was too late for that. Marcus didn't shake his hand, didn't need pleasantries. He pointed towards Samantha's bag, still sitting on the table. "Why was she searched?" "She was flagged by the airline staff," the supervisor said quickly. "We were just following protocol." Marcus's gaze cut through him. "Protocol. You detained a federal official without cause. ignored identification, confiscated personal property, interfered with interstate travel during official duties. Do you understand what that looks like? The supervisor's throat bobbed. We didn't know who she was. Marcus leaned in slightly, but his voice dropped softer. That's the problem. You thought you could treat her that way, because to you, she was no one. Silence. Samantha stood beside him now, calm, quiet, but not small. The gate agent, the one who had started this mess, lingered in the back hallway. Samantha's eyes found him. He didn't meet her gaze. He stared at the floor like it had answers. It didn't. Was she aggressive? Marcus asked louder now. Did she shout? Threaten anyone? No, sir, the TSA officer admitted. She asked why her seat was changed. That was it? Yes, sir. Marcus took a deep breath and then turned to the supervisor. Then explain this. How does a woman asking about her seat become a security risk? The supervisor stammered. Sir, I don't. Because the answer is simple. She asked the wrong question in the wrong tone from the wrong face, and you escalated. You let bias make the call before reason ever entered the room. A group of passengers had gathered now, quiet, watching, filming. The air felt heavier. This isn't just about a missed flight, Samantha finally said. It's about what happens when you give someone a little power and no accountability. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break any rules. But I stopped being invisible, and that's what made me dangerous to them. The supervisor looked ashamed. We'd like to offer a rebooking. First class. Our next. Marcus cut him off with a look. She doesn't need your upgrade. She needed your respect, and she needed it 45 minutes ago. Someone in the crowd murmured, damn right. The moment was no longer confined to gate 14. It was unfolding everywhere. In every phone held aloft, in every passenger who'd ever been talked down to, delayed, dismissed, because they didn't look the part. Marcus turned once more to the gate agent. You have a name? The young man swallowed. Cullen. Cullen, Marcus said slowly. You made a mistake, and now the world is watching how you fix it. Cullen nodded. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. The understanding, the weight of it. As they turned to leave, no one stopped them. No offers, no vouchers, no rehearsed apologies. Just quiet. Not the kind of quiet born from politeness, the kind born from consequence. Outside, Samantha paused. Did I do the right thing? She asked softly. Marcus looked at her like she just asked if fire knew how to burn. You didn't do what they expected. You didn't break. That's more than right. She smiled, just barely. They treated me like I was disposable. He touched her cheek. They treated you like they couldn't see you, but they will now. And they walked on, not just out of the terminal, but into something bigger. Not revenge, not even justice, just truth. Because sometimes the strongest protest doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from showing up with someone who refuses to let the world look away. By the time Samantha and Marcus reached the parking garage, the world had already begun to shift. Her phone buzzed. Then again, notifications poured in. Emails, missed calls, news alerts. She ignored them all. She wasn't ready, not yet. The air outside was sharp with early morning stillness, but her mind was anything but quiet. She hadn't cried. Not when she missed the funeral. Not when they laid her bag open like she was hiding something. Not even when Marcus had walked in and flipped the script with nothing but his voice. But now, standing by the car, watching the terminal doors slide shut behind them, she felt it building. Not tears, but something heavier. Something ancestral. They didn't expect anyone to care, she said, voice low. Marcus leaned against the rear of the car, hands in his pockets. They didn't expect me to show up. They expected me to shrink, she added, to walk away. But you didn't. No, she whispered, I didn't. And the world had watched her do it. Across the country, videos taken at Gate 14 were being uploaded. Some grainy, others sharp, but all carried the same message. This is what it looks like when dignity gets delayed. A woman standing still while everyone else looked away. until her husband stepped forward and forced everyone to see what they tried so hard to ignore. One clip showed Samantha being led down a narrow hallway, flanked by TSA officers who wouldn't meet her eyes. Another captured Marcus's voice, calm, clipped, undeniable. You thought she was a no one. In a break room tucked behind the airline terminal, the young agent Cullen sat hunched over a chair, hands buried in his hair. The manager stood beside him, arms crossed. You could have just moved her to another seat, the manager said, quieter now. Not angry, just tired. Cullen didn't respond. You thought she was just someone being difficult? But people saw her. They saw you. He nodded. The weight had landed. It didn't matter who she was. It mattered how he made her feel. Across living rooms, classrooms, subway platforms, people were watching. Not just watching the videos, but seeing themselves in them. A school teacher in Denver posted, "They called me aggressive because I asked where the supplies went. I didn't shout. They just didn't like being questioned." Watching Samantha stand still like that, I felt that. Yori, I've lived that. A nurse in Atlanta wrote, "My hospital ID didn't matter when I asked for help with a patient who looked like me. I got flagged, just like her." A military veteran from Indiana commented, "They treated me like a threat because I asked if I could keep my service dog beside me. I didn't yell. I asked, that was all." And then came a video from a 22-year-old college student in Phoenix. I've never seen someone handle something like that without raising their voice. She didn't have to. She made it loud anyway. News outlets caught wind. First local, then national. Congresswoman detained at gate. Judge husband demands answers. Federal official misses funeral after airline random review. Viral moment sparks questions about discrimination in air travel. But it wasn't just headlines. It was commentary. On daytime shows, anchors debated what random really meant. On podcasts, voices cracked as they recounted personal moments of invisibility. On TikTok, teenagers reenacted the moment Marcus said, "That's the problem. You thought she was no one." Because that line wasn't just about Samantha, it was about them. Samantha didn't speak to the press, not immediately. She didn't want to become the face of another media cycle. She didn't want her grief for Troy, for the funeral she never made, reduced to a 30-second soundbite. Instead, she waited. She watched. She listened. In her hotel room that night, she scrolled through hundreds of messages, some angry, some raw, some so quietly devastating they made her close the phone just to breathe. One from a woman in New Mexico. "I was pulled at a checkpoint for asking a second question. I didn't yell. I just wanted to understand. They treated me like a problem, like I was wrong for not accepting less." Another from an older man in Ohio. "I saw them do that to my wife once. It changed her. She's still afraid to fly alone." Samantha felt the weight of them all. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. It was about everyone who had been taught to stay quiet to be safe. Everyone who swallowed their dignity so they could keep moving. Everyone who thought their pain didn't matter unless someone famous carried it first. Marcus returned from a brief walk just past midnight. He found Samantha still awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, laptop in her lap, fingers paused above the keyboard. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "I think," she began, then stopped. "I think people needed to see it, not because of who I am, but because of how familiar it felt." He nodded. "Are you writing?" She exhaled. Not a statement, not a press release, just a letter. Something honest. "Good." She turned the screen toward him. The first few lines were already typed. "This isn't just about one gate or one flight. It's about how quickly people forget the rules of decency when they think no one important is watching. It's about how quiet someone gets when power sits on the other side of a desk, and how loud silence can be when you stand in it." The letter was published 2 days later, shared by every major newspaper, quoted by anchors, pinned at the top of advocacy group pages. But the line that caught fire, the one that struck people deep, was this: "Dignity isn't something we earn through recognition. It's something we deserve automatically, every time, no exceptions." The airline released a second apology, longer, more contrite, naming her directly. It didn't matter. The damage wasn't reputational, it was existential. People had seen the videos. They had lived the moments. And now they were responding. Not with noise, but with remembrance, with recognition. Because Samantha Ellis didn't just remind them of injustice, she reminded them that they had value, even when the world tried to erase it. Later that week, at a university town hall in Kansas City, a young woman approached Samantha after a panel. She was 19, nervous, brown skin, wide eyes. "I saw what happened to you," she said. "I didn't know what to do when it happened to me. But you didn't say much. And somehow, that said everything." Samantha smiled gently. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand still." A week had passed since Gate 14, but the tremor it caused had only just begun to echo. Samantha Ellis was back in Washington, D.C., the city that measured everything by calendars, polls, and the next vote. But she had returned carrying something weightier than any bill or headline, a moment that had refused to die. She stepped out of the black sedan in front of Union Station that morning, not as a congresswoman rushing to a committee hearing, but as a woman still reckoning with what it meant to be seen and dismissed all in the same breath. The air was crisp, early spring, pressing gently against her blazer. She took a deep breath before entering the building, not because she was nervous, but because she knew what waited inside wasn't politics. It was people. One morning, Samantha sat alone on the National Mall, watching joggers pass by as sunlight scattered through cherry blossoms. She had just gotten off the phone with Troy's daughter. "She saw the hearing," Samantha whispered aloud to no one. "Said she showed it to her civics class. Told them, 'That's my Aunt Sam.'" She smiled misty-eyed. She didn't get to speak at his funeral, but somehow she delivered the eulogy after all. Not in a church, but in a room full of strangers learning how to see people again. Because in the end, Gate 14 wasn't the beginning or the end. It was a mirror. And when Samantha stood still that day, surrounded by silence, resistance, and suspicion, she made the world pause and ask, if that had been me, would anyone have stood up? Now, with every story shared, every signature gathered, and every eye opened, the answer was growing clearer. Yes, because one woman refused to flinch, and instead helped everyone else stand a little taller. Weeks later, Samantha Ellis stood at the back of a modest church in New Orleans, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows in muted reds and golds. She hadn't planned to speak, but when the pastor called her forward, she didn't hesitate. This wasn't a funeral. It was a community memorial for Troy, a gathering arranged by friends who knew she hadn't made it to the first one. As she stepped up to the podium, the room fell into a hush. "I missed the flight," she began quietly, her voice steady. "But I didn't miss the reason I needed to be there." Troy lived with quiet strength. He wasn't loud. He didn't chase attention. He just showed up. That was his protest, being there for people even when life made it hard. She paused, her eyes finding Troy's daughter in the front row. "What happened to me at that gate? It hurt," she continued, "but it also revealed something. It showed how many people walk through life unheard, unseen, and how silence, when chosen, can be louder than rage." After the service, an elderly woman approached her outside. She had tears in her eyes and clutched Samantha's hand with surprising strength. "You didn't just stand still for you," she said. "You stood still for all of us." That night back in her hotel, Samantha sat on the bed scrolling through old photos of Troy. She wasn't crying. She was remembering. Remembering the boy who once taught her how to climb trees, and the man who always said, "Never let them tell you who you are." The video from Gate 14 still floated across timelines. Her speech in Congress was clipped into reels. But what mattered most weren't the headlines or hashtags. It was the messages, still coming. From a teacher, from a mom, from a man trying to get to his son's wedding. All of them had one thing in common. They'd been made to feel small, and now they didn't feel so alone. Samantha leaned back, eyes to the ceiling. "This wasn't supposed to be a movement," she whispered. "But sometimes you don't start a revolution with a shout. You start it by refusing to bow your head when the world tells you to look down." What happened to Samantha Ellis at Gate 14 wasn't just about a missed flight. It was about how easily people in power can strip someone of their dignity, not through violence, but through dismissal, through silence, through the subtle suggestion that their presence is a problem. But here's the truth. You don't need a title to deserve respect. You don't need to be famous, powerful, or important. Being human is enough. Samantha didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She stood still. And in that stillness, she told a louder story. One that resonated with anyone who's ever been overlooked, talked down to, or made to feel small just for existing in the wrong place with the wrong face. The lesson is simple but profound. Real power is knowing who you are and never letting anyone convince you that you matter less. Whether you're standing at an airport gate, behind a customer service counter, or walking into a job interview, remember, how you treat others when no one is watching says everything about who you are when everyone is. So the next time you witness someone being dismissed or ignored, don't look away. See them, hear them, stand with them, because one silent moment of dignity can spark 1,000 voices.